Thank you very much for attending. And I invited here to talk a little bit about on-reserve manufacturing and community manufacturing. And I know majority of you guys are EDOs. And so what I wanted to be able to, I invited Alan Arcand, who's here as well from the Manufacturing Exporter Association of Canada, and also John Johnstone from OSME, the Office of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises from PSPC. John, are you here today? I think John should be. I saw his name there very briefly.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, beauty. Okay, so John Johnstone and a fellow named Matt Owl, but he probably is about as confused as I told him it starts at 2 o'clock, so he might show up around 2. So I apologize for that. So without further ado, I just want to give you a perspective of what the landscape looks like concerning manufacturing in Canada in general. And also feel free, Alan, to chime in with some comments about the state of that. And I think you're going to cover that when your presentation comes, a few words. Okay, so without further ado, I'll share the screen here. So, okay, so here's what I have. So the beef background over the past 20 years, Canada has really offshored a lot of its manufacturing goods to other countries, as you probably know, China and India, other places like Bangladesh. So this has caused a net effect of, our GDP being manufacturing contributing to about 20% of our total GDP in 1986, down to 10% over the past few years. And of course, COVID has devastated the world economy, so it's making people rethink manufacturing. So as a result, just to give you a perspective, just by the numbers, offshoring of strategic products like PPE, I'll give you an example, like for example, most of our ventilators came from Italy. And of course, Italy went and locked in a lot of their ventilators, so there was a major ventilator shortage. And companies like Airbus and so on and so forth, even CAE were into making ventilators as a, to supply the current demand from the Canadian perspective. So globalization also, caused that kind of centralization of certain strategic goods caused a shortage of PPE equipment. And of course, ensured offshoring produced, an inherited supply in the supply chain. So that was one of the risks that came out very clearly. One of the lessons learned, and this is when I was looking at it from was reading, and basically Canada needed a strong domestic manufacturing sector. That became very clear. They had to rethink their reliance on just cheaper labor, for shorter term goals, but what is a longer term vision? But revitalizing the manufacturing sector was a lot of the discussions have been discussed to how Canada can globally compete. And of course, it's part of the strategic strategy to create those jobs that have been lost, and some of also the jobs that are changing as well because of the global pandemic. So here's a viewpoint of the vision of the manufacturing sector. So if you kind of look at it, sort of all sectors of it, transportation networks, telecommunications, retrofit, there's a tremendous amount of manufacturing possibilities. In terms of, responsible, recycling of products, reclamation, remediation of industrial sites, the reduction of emissions from transportation to materials, pharmaceutical goods, agriculture. So it's basically around, around the spectrum. This is just giving a snapshot. But one of the things that I wanted to point out to is the clean energy technology. And you see a lot of the work that actually, even south of the border, when they talk about the infrastructure projects, recreating, batteries and all sorts of other things that are associated with clean energy. So they think the manufacturing and the green energy is being tied together. So how does the Indigenous community fit in? 60% of the Indigenous communities, well, we live around urban centers, you know, and a majority of you as communities have economic development offices, and they look at what the potential is in terms of youth employment and youth employment and you know, socioeconomic development. One of the things that Canada's recommitted itself to is the 5% spend. So then total 5% of government spend is going to be dedicated towards Indigenous people's inclusion in you know, basically with all government spend. So one of the things they look at, and this is what we've been having discussions around, is the ITBs, the IPCs, and what they call IPBs. What they mean by that is industrial technical benefits. This is basically where they're having a huge government's going to put a huge amount of spend, like for example the future aircrew training. That's all going to happen within Indigenous territory. So they're going to put together technical benefits, and companies have to respond with an Indigenous benefit plan. That's what the IPB stand for. So the meaning that how are they going to include Indigenous communities, Indigenous companies, and create opportunity. And of course, IPC means Indigenous participation component, which are large purchases of tens and 20 millions of dollars, and how the Indigenous communities can be included in that. Where that's been, and this comes out of CCAB report, the Canadian Council of Aboriginal People, manufacturing for Indigenous manufacturing is sort of targeted around the 3rd and 4th tier level, right down to the component level, down to building pieces to go into a larger product. So in this panel, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at, you know, what's the role of EDOs in manufacturing and how we can support the economic recovery, and how we can continue on that Canada's reconciliation journey in the post-pandemic economy. So in this panel discussion, we're going to look at, you know, Indigenous people, manufacturing, the previous state, the current state, the future recovery, and what's the art of the possible. So very open discussion. So I hope that level sets. And what I'm going to do is going to open up the floor to, I'm just going to close this. I'm going to stop sharing here. I'm going to open up the floor to have a bit of discussion. So I want to introduce you to Alan Arcand. Alan, is it Arcand or Arcand?
Yeah, you can anglicize it. Arcand is good.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, take it away, Alan. What's your thoughts about manufacturing?
Yeah, no, I think I don't have a slide deck with you, but I think your slide deck, you know, hinted at kind of the main things I'm thinking about for the panel discussion today. I like the chart you showed of the decline in Canada of the strength of the industry or the share of economic activity. I would say it's, you know, there's two parts of that. One is just the economy is changing in structure over time. All developed economies do, moving into more services. So manufacturing is bound to have a smaller role. But I think what you hinted at, what is true too, is that manufacturing in Canada has struggled to attract investment for a long period of time as it's moved offshore to other countries. And that has led to a erosion of the industry as well in the country. But that being said, today it is, as your chart showed, it is 10% of the economy. And if you were to look at the major sectors, it actually would rank second among all industries in Canada. So still a very important industry. And just as an aside, the number one industry in Canada, I'm sure everyone can guess, it's real estate. Probably, you know, insert your own housing market joke about Canada there, right? But after real estate, it's manufacturing. 10% still employs 1.7 million Canadians across the country. It has outsized impacts elsewhere. It accounts for 2/3 of Canada's merchandise trade. It also generates about 1/3 of the country's research and development spending in the private sector. And another thing I think about today when you're talk about you know, not on-reserve manufacturing is that I think while many people, when they think of manufacturing, they think of, you know, large multinational corporations. But in reality, in Canada, we do have those, but the vast majority of manufacturing companies are small firms. About 96% have fewer than 100 employees, and only about 300 or so companies have more than 500 employees. So it's a very important industry, and it has a lot of small businesses too. I think those things are key to think about today during the panel discussion.
Yeah. So could you tell us a little bit about your organization, Alan?
Yeah, sure. I should have introduced myself first. Yeah, but as Dave mentioned, I am chief economist at CME. I've been in the role for about a year and a bit, so I started right before the pandemic hit. So it's been an interesting start in this journey, that's for sure. Prior to that, I worked at the Conference Board of Canada for 19 years, held a variety of roles, including associate director of the Center for Municipal Studies. So city economics is still close to my heart. In terms of CME, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, this is an organization that's been around for almost 150 years. We advocate for and represent the interests of the manufacturing sector in Canada. I think of CME as having a common goal, but two ways of achieving that goal. One is providing services. So we want to help manufacturing businesses grow in Canada. So we provide a lot of services to companies, like lean training, productivity training, export support, leadership development, a lot of services like that. And we do a lot of stuff on the advocacy side, which is more of what I work on. So we do a lot of advocacy with government. We seek to influence and make recommendations to government that allow manufacturers to compete both at home and abroad.
Sweet, thank you. I'm gonna bring John to the floor here. John Johnstone from OSME. So I just want to give for the uninitiated, John, please introduce yourself and tell us about OSME and maybe say a few words about the IPC and IPB. I threw a lot of acronyms out there, but it's an important role. So.
Hey, no problem at all. So my name is John Johnstone. I'm coming to you today from Victoria, BC. I'm with the Government of Canada, Public Service Procurement Canada. So basically public works or the buying arm of government. And under that, my role is to be with the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises. And what we do really is we work with smaller suppliers. We work with all suppliers, but certainly smaller businesses to help them understand and navigate the government procurement processes, how the government buys stuff, and how businesses or supporting organizations like the EDO network can actively participate and maximize the opportunity of selling goods or services to the government of Canada. David mentioned a couple of acronyms like the Indigenous benefit plans. And basically there's a number of policies or opportunities or strategies that the government of Canada uses to support Indigenous businesses and Indigenous communities. And we've seen a massive shift in that direction, certainly over the last 10 years, but definitely over the last 3 to 5 years, where we're coming out with better strategies and better organization to bring Indigenous businesses into the Government of Canada supply chains and where possible to buy goods and services from them. As David mentioned, there's a commitment for the ministers, so the heads of all the government departments and agencies, to where possible ramp up to at least a 5% purchasing from Indigenous businesses. This is relatively new. It is being sorted out now. So we don't know exactly what it looks like, but we know it is happening and it's going to continue to happen. So I'll probably stop there and give it back to David, and I can provide more information.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's super. And just to give you a perspective, as government's working on, as John pointed out, it's so important for EDOs and Indigenous suppliers to get into the dialogue. And that's why, and also the Canadian Manufacturing Association, get involved into the dialogue, especially as Canada goes through a reconciliation journey as we are in right now. Economic reconciliation is going to be one of the cornerstones, I think, of that building of new relations between Indigenous people and Canada to reestablish that nation-to-nation relationship. So we all have a role to play in it. So I hope we get more and more into the dialogue. I wanted to bring a fellow named Matthew Owl, and his company is basically set up mass manufacturing PPE. And I think Matthew, I saw him come into the room. Matthew, if you could turn on your camera, that'd be awesome. And I think he's probably around here. See if I can find him. Is Matt Owl? Oh, is Matt? Oh, there you are. Hey, Matt, how's it going? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm on the road right now. Actually, when you're manufacturing PPE, of course, distribution becomes an integral part of that whole supply chain. So I find myself doing a lot these days in order to facilitate the whole PPE manufacturing sector that we're involved in. Thank you very much for the introduction there, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Super, super. So, Matt, I'm going to hit you with a question here, and could you tell me, like, the journey you went from, getting into the manufacturing business? How did it start? Let's start from the beginning there.
Sure. Well, FMPI was set up as a wholesale distribution, and we were looking at primarily textiles. And of course, when the pandemic hit, there was a call for businesses from the Canadian government to answer that call for the manufacturing of PPE. So we started importing PPE, in the infancy stages of the pandemic, like most companies in Canada, from overseas. And there was a message that was resonating, and that message was that, they were uncertain about the product that they were buying, the certification, and, that message had that underlining, are we purchasing an inferior product? So I reached out to the manufacturing sector in Ontario and met with a company that our goals aligned together, and that company was Dentex Canada. So together we figured, okay, well, let's open up some manufacturing facilities, one in Wikwemikong on unceded territory and the other one in Sagamuk Anishinaabe First Nation. So to answer that call, we teamed together. We provided the Indigenous HR for the manufacturing, sent them over to the Vaughan facility, have them trained. And in the process, we were looking at what communities had the infrastructure in place. And of course, Wikwemikong had its industrial park. Sagamuk had a very large building and was centrally located next to a major route. So we began that journey, I guess, making the 3-ply face masks. And it was from the paradigm shift that was happening, where the cost of production in around Vaughan was quite high in comparison to rural communities, where you could see a discount on the rent. And of course, there were some benefits to doing business on First Nations. One of them, of course, is the tax incentive. So the whole process itself, I think, took about 6 months to work all of the finer details, getting the machines, knowing where purchase the machines, bringing in the spun bound and the cloths to make the PPE. So it took us about 6 months. We had moved everything over to Wikwemikong, where we opened up there. We had our grand opening in November, and we've been manufacturing ever since.
Wow, super. So you ended up creating jobs on OnReserve. Not only that, you had an industrial park. You took advantage of the industrial park, and were able to put up a building, making it really cost effective for a partnership. So you have land and you have people. And I'm going to switch over to Al. Sorry, Al. Al, what impact would that be in terms of, let's say, if I'm a manufacturer and a non-Indigenous one, and I have the know-how and the capability, would that provide a competitive incentive, let's say, to partner along those lines and create a manufacturing industry within OnReserve?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think it's any different from OnReserve and non-OnReserve. Like, I think, you mentioned at the top of the presentation about, some of the supply chain issues we've faced during the industry, or the world's faced since the pandemic started. It's actually still pretty bad to this day. Like there's a shortage of containers, for instance. So it's just hard to get stuff over back and forth over the ocean. And there's a lot of talk, and we've done our own research showing that companies are looking to diversify supply chains because diverse. I think you can argue there's diversity through strength through diversity, right? And whereas the old business models were kind of hyper efficiency of just in time, I think some firms are starting to look at a different model of like what they call just in case. The best analogy I've heard is the idea of driving around without a spare tire, right? The just in time model was basically driving with a spare tire. So I think firms are looking for more redundancy, given the issues they've had over the last 16 months, and more diversity, in case which would help alleviate those problems, and domestic production as well, given the concerns lately, even before the pandemic, of deglobalization and the kind of slowly rising trade barriers. So those are always on industry's mind. So I think those two things do suggest there is definitely a huge opportunity here.
Yeah. So one of the things that Matt had brought up, Al, is basically he talked about quality. Quality, once you offshore, you kind of lose that view of what quality would look like. But if you bring it onto reserve, do you think that would have an impact on quality, or being so close together in terms of keeping everything domestic?
Yeah, I think there is concern about the quality of the mass from offshore. I mean, personally, I buy my mass from Canada. It's not just a patriotic thing. I'm assuming the quality control is higher, and you can buy a T-shirt from another country, and if it rips, who cares, right? But you want to have the mask that works right? It's a health and safety issue. So, yeah, I think there's an opportunity, and maybe Matt can talk about it, because I know one of the big issues in the mask world is a lack of a standard, right? I don't know. I think there is some push to get that going in Canada. I think companies have to go through the U.S. now to get certified, if I'm correct. I don't know more. I've heard some things about it, and I just find it interesting that once we get that that setup going, it's probably a lot easier for us to kind of build up that industry even stronger than it is now.
Yeah. And maybe again, I'll ask this question to you. Yeah, Al, maybe Matt, feel free to jump in. Right now we're talking about PPE. What about the other sides of it? I put up a slide there, and there's energy, and there's also. Do you think along those lines there's opportunity along with the Indigenous community be located so close to natural resources and so close to the source of the product? Would there be an opportunity to actually bring that together and do component manufacturing right at the source, or to bring where I'm driving at?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, definitely. I mean, what I found interesting, I've seen that chart, that table before, and if just looking at it, and if you went and looked at the federal budget from 2 weeks ago, the themes are the same, right? Like the budget really, the strategy, one of the key strategies of the budget is to strengthen Canada's life sciences industry, biomanufacturing, just because what we've talked about, what's happened in the pandemic, right? Like we couldn't get PPE at the beginning of the pandemic, and now we've had trouble, getting vaccines until recently. So there's going to be a push, obviously, to make sure that for the next pandemic, we have all the PPE, enough of a domestic source. We have, vaccination, both on the research side and the production side, ready to go in case this happens again. But the other side of the strategy in Canada is on the clean technology side, which is something else you also mentioned. There's a big push there. Obviously, the government in December released a climate change plan where they want to, achieve net zero by 2050. It's a very, very ambitious goal, and it's going to require, this transformation to clean technology. There's a lot of incentives in the budget to not only get companies to, adopt this technology, but also to create this technology, scale it up. There's a strategy there to create, like, make Canada a world leader in clean technology exports, for instance. So I think, yeah, you're right. And given that, the Canada is very resource rich, but you need to think in terms of the clean technology world. I think something you need to keep in mind is I think there's a big push, given this net zero push. It's really going to be a big push to build these critical mineral supply chain that will help build the batteries and other goods that are in the zero emission vehicle supply chain. I was just reading an interesting article today about there's a huge, if people have noticed, there's been a big jump in commodity prices the last few weeks, given the economy is recovering and rebounding. But a lot of the commodities that are really increasing right now are commodities that are going to batteries. And Canada is rich in these minerals, and there's a huge opportunity for us to develop the supply chain, and I'm sure with the participation of Indigenous peoples too. So I think that's really something you're going to see governments push for in the next 10 to 20 years.
Super. I'm just gonna bring John. Don't turn off your camera, guys. Just keep it up. John, jump in this conversation. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to add, product authenticity is absolutely correct. When you're dealing with a variety of products and a variety of resellers, one of the key questions we get mentioned to us all the time is this certified? So we go through the process of FDA, we go through Health Canada, and of course, when you're dealing in those volumes, and in trying to remain competitive with what's out there, I think it's really important to focus in on the standards that we have here in Canada, because we're being now propositioned by several companies from the United States looking to purchase PPE as well. I think if there's an opportunity there to create a brand that a Canadian signature for the masks, with regards to the manufacturing of PPE, that we should focus probably on something like that. And of course, we're going through the certification process as well with NIOSH, and anybody that's been involved in that process knows that it is not simple. So in this whole manufacturing of PPE, we managed to become certified with FDA. We also managed to get our ISO designation, and all of this while we were manufacturing, because these are the standards that companies are looking for. And I think where the real competitive advantage is that, are these the same certifications that other countries are working under? And if so, how do you authenticate the product that you're purchasing from those countries? And there is a shift, that paradigm shift happening in the manufacturing sector. I think right now, there is a lot of opportunities out there for Indigenous companies to become actively involved in manufacturing, but really knowing where the market is going, and in that anticipation, you build your strategy around that. Because, with the new guidelines for plastics, that's going to make paper products the next big thing. So I think that that's one area that FNPI is going to be looking at very closely in the very near future. And it's looking at creating these additional partnerships with these municipalities that have the mills, the means, and the resources to help with the product that we're looking for in order to become actively involved in that manufacturing sector. So knowing and focusing on where you want to be and where the markets are going to change, with this paradigm shift that's happening in the markets, that anticipation, I think, is what makes that lucrative. Because we all know, if you're becoming involved in the manufacturing of PPE or paper products, you have to have some place to go with that marketing. Let's face it, when the call went out for the manufacturing of PPE, a lot of businesses did it, and all of a sudden, where did they take this product? We were all looking to the federal government for their procurement of PPE. And then we became inundated by foreign products, so much so that it was more lucrative to purchase something from a foreign national as it was to purchase domestically. And these are some of the challenges as Indigenous manufacturers, or just in the supply chain management, that we have to face, So we're looking for additional markets on the local and regional level, and hoping at some point, we are able to export to other countries, because that's where the next big shift is going to be occurring as well. You take a market of 36 million people here in Canada with that of 356 million in the United States, and all of a sudden your market is there. So, we're working very closely with other Indigenous tribes south of the border, and that's really helping us to focus in on additional markets, because you have to augment what you're doing. Otherwise, you'll never be able to compete with what's out there.
This is a good segue actually to my question to John is, what is the role of government in this creating? Because government's the biggest buyer, we look at it and, can they be the catalyst, and can they be the opportunity where they can bring it down to the municipal or even into the provincial network? And what is the role of government in this?
Well, I think for sure, I fully agree that there's a role. I think one of the issues that I hear, Matt, loud and clear, that one of the things is you need the customer. You need to have someone who's going to take the chance, who's going to buy the first round of your product, that's going to actually support you through it. One of the things with government procurement, whether at any level, is that it's really sometimes rigid in the processes, and it takes time for those processes to adjust. So in a situation like the pandemic, the government of Canada used a national security exemption, which allowed them to basically buy differently. And it was actually a really exciting time within procurement, because we were able to see what we could actually do when we reduced a couple of those barriers. The unfortunate part of that is that as the pandemic goes on, we revert back to more of that risk adverse or traditional approaches, which also doesn't mean that we're often able to move as agilely or with the same agility when we're doing stuff. I think over time, one of the key things is this 5% commitment and the focus of government on economic reconciliation. Hopefully, as it's driven down through all of the government departments to an individual level, we have a greater opportunity to do that. I think one of the key things, in the smaller setup, is these small purchasing opportunities with the government, often under $25K or under $40,000. It's not necessarily going to hit something out of the park, but for the EDO, the economic development officers, or for businesses on the line, being able to target some of those procurement opportunities to get some of that traction and understand the process and get into our queue for supply chain is really, really valuable where it's possible. But to Matthew's point as well, is searching out other levels of government, finding the market, who is actually going to be buying it. And to Matthew's point too, is figuring out where the exporting opportunities are for Indigenous businesses. There is a great opportunity right now, both domestically and for export, to look at these, but it comes down to those first couple of sales. Certification, it's the guarantee. It's people are going to be very risk averse about supply chains for the next while. And where you've got the ability to really show that the supply chain is stable, it's certified, it's backed by the government when we're looking at Canadian companies exporting, they're the things that are going to make a big difference, certainly in the near term, when we're looking at supply chains, whether it's about masks or really at the end of the day, whether it's about lumber, which is another hot topic. So there is absolutely a role. I think one of the key things for us in government is to make sure it's very clear for people how we can support them, how they actually work with us, and removing those barriers so people like Matthew can focus on providing the high quality products that he can provide, and not necessarily spending his days worrying about the government processes. So where we really come into play here is hopefully supporting companies and making sure that we're clearing out those procurement literacy barriers so they can just do the work they want to do. And that's the first step. And I'm hoping that, we come back and have this discussion in 2 years, that those barriers have been relaxed so that we can actually just be focused more on the moving of the product. But this was a massive change. This was a paradigm shift within our operations. And I know for sure right now, based on the budget, I know Alan mentioned the budget, there is going to be a lot of movement around government procurement over the next 3 to 5 years based on the budget commitment, to see what we can do to reduce some of these barriers so companies can get those sales quicker and more easily without necessarily having to navigate as much process. So that's my kind of take. It's not a silver bullet. Federal government, it is difficult at times, but like Matthew mentioned, utilizing all those other levels of government, and with the PPE scenario, because it's a provincial jurisdiction in a lot of ways, targeting a lot of those provincial establishments could move mountains in terms of getting that product moving. So I guess that's my more long-winded answer.
No, it's excellent actually, because it tees me up for my next question, which I'm going to ask Al, is there's an exporting side of this, right? So we're kind of looking like, okay, produce within here in Canada, but how do we export? You know, and what would be the lessons learned from us from, you know, going from 20% down to 10%, now saying, okay, here's an opportunity to rebuild and then export. How do we do that, you know, from your perspective?
Right. Well, you know, efforts like these to, you know, think about being strategic about building back the manufacturing sector will help. Because it has, you know, if you want to look behind the numbers that you showed, why one of the reasons why manufacturing is only 10% of the economy when it was 20% in the 80s is there's really, as I mentioned, it's been very weak investment in the industry in Canada. And a good comparison, always compare against the US. So if you go back to 2004 until 2019, investment in the US increased by about 50% in manufacturing, whereas in Canada, it was only about 8% higher. So much slower rate of investment, and lo and behold, you get weak investment, you get weak production growth, you get weak export growth, right? So if you were to compare Canada's manufacturing sector against its G7 counterparts, or its the other 6 countries in the G7, we've had the weakest production performance since 2005. So again, we need, if we're gonna, you know, all this talk about you know, boosting manufacturing in the post-pandemic economy is going to require us to turn around these troubling trends. And I'm glad you mentioned exports, because I think it's important. We talk about the issues, we're talking about the issues, problems of globalization, right? About the offshoring and manufacturing, but it's important that on the whole, Canada wins more than it loses when the world's globalizing. Sorry, couldn't get that word out, because we're a small open economy, it's small domestic market, and if Canadian firms are going to thrive, not only are they going to have to like do well in Canada, they're going to have to like get the product sell to foreign markets. So I think that's important to mention, right? So obviously there's a role for procurement, something that CME has long advocated for. But the other end of the spectrum is we need to like make sure our companies are ready to be exporters.
Mm-hmm. This is another great point I kind of want to bring into it. It boils down to land and people. You know, during a land claim settlement or you know, or some sort of comprehensive land claim agreement, there's usually an influx of cash where communities can invest, where other parts of the Canadian economy where investors are not investing, or they're into real estate, as you pointed out earlier. If let's, you know, for an Indigenous community, we kind of think it's 7 generations. It's, you know, we can sell land and that'll be a one-shot deal, or we can create an infrastructure and so on and so forth that'll kind of last for 7 generations, you know, and we build that. So I think from the Indigenous community, and Matt, feel free to chime in if you feel differently, is where we're investing here. Now, could we provide, if we're investing here, is there a way that we can provide that competitive advantage that, you know, the manufacturing community would need in terms of, say, land? Because a band council can basically say, you know what, I'm gonna lease this for 5 years for $1, you know, as long as it creates all those jobs and everything else for the next 5 years and bring capacity. You know, is that something that kind of builds that business case for those partnerships? Matt, I'll throw that. I'll let Alan answer that question, and then I'll ask you that. You know, come back and say, okay, would that be attractive, and how would I make that work on reserve? You know, so would that be something, a catalyst, if we can bring land and people to the table?
Yeah, I think people is another point to make. Right, land is obviously important, and you know, we're referring to the real estate industry in Canada being so strong. And Matthew mentioned earlier about the cost of operating in Vaughan and Toronto, and a lot of manufacturers in the area, you know, face these high costs because there's just not a lot of land, industrial land left to take, and more every year, industrial land. There's push for industrial land to be redeveloped into real estate, given that there's obviously housing shortages in the CMA. There is the provincial government has worked to alleviate that problem, but nevertheless, I think given the Toronto region and other major metropolitan areas are fast growing, there's huge appetite to build more housing. There's always going to be little issues around finding the land to do the industrial work. So yeah, I think on that front, yes, you can probably see there's an opportunity there on reserves, given that there's land there. People, one of the probably the most pressing challenges manufacturers face, and this is not just manufacturing, but other industries too, but manufacturing is, when you ask them what their biggest issue is, it's always finding people, it's labor, right? It's not just, it's unskilled labor, it's skilled labor, both. The population of Canada is aging. The baby boomers are retiring. We're trying to bring in more immigrants to try to offset that trend, but there's just not enough coming in to offset the aging of the population. So you have all these waves of baby boomers retiring every year, fewer people entering the workforce. So I think, again, that's another opportunity, right? Is the labor that we need in order to do the work too.
I think, Alan, that's one of the real problems I think faced by the manufacturing sectors, the HR. Even within First Nations communities, we often think, let's create a business and we have all of this HR at our disposal. However, we know, David, I'm sure you're aware that in Indigenous cultures and communities, we have a problem with people coming out to work. You can create as many jobs as you want to. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fill them. See, we even have to look at outsourcing to municipalities, because the truth is, you can build as many factories as you want to, but if you don't have the skilled labor access to those markets, then that's a deterrent to even want to be a part of that whole process. And for First Nations to create, forgive me for using this terminology, but the white elephant, if a First Nation does have an industrial park and they're well developed and they're continuously developing onto the park, and growth is a part of that economic strategy within that community, I think that it makes perfectly good sense to become actively involved in the manufacturing sector. But for a First Nation that doesn't have an industrial park or is in the infancy stages of planning that, I would highly recommend, first and foremost, developing that strategy first. Have some place where you can bring an industry partner in, because it might be 3 to 5 years before you see anything from that sector. It just so happened that in doing our diligence with the communities, Wikwemikong had an industrial park. So they had a building, they had everything that we needed, a population of 14,000 community members. So it wasn't like we just had picked a First Nation, said, okay, we're going to partner with them. No, there was a lot that went into it. The planning behind moving all of these machines over, because we also had to train the individuals that were going to be working in the manufacturing facility as well. So there was a good fit with what Wikwemikong had and the storage and the spacing that they had in Sagamok. So being able to do that, knowing that we'd see a return on that investment quite quickly, was enough of a reason for us to want to partner up in those communities. To approach somebody on the basis that they are in the probably going to create an industrial park, you're still looking at development, zoning, etc., BCRs. But to the communities that are actively involved in industrial parks, Sault Ste. Marie, Sudbury, and the other communities, I think that it makes perfectly good sense. But picking those partners and knowing where you want to go is a part of that strategy. So it really makes sense to do the diligence before you become involved, because there are other ways for communities to become involved in the manufacturing sector without having to have an industrial park. All part of the supply chain, we can call upon communities. Acting as a hub, you can have a centralized location where it's a storage facility, where manufacturing is happening on another community, where you're taking inventory from various places, your port of entry, Montreal, Toronto, and it's in a very close proximity to where you're going to be manufacturing. if you're looking at just becoming involved in the manufacturing sector, you really need to take a look at your demographics and understand where are you going with all of this product. Because like us, at the end of the day, we're competing in a very competitive market right now. And where I think a lot of businesses across Canada thought, oh, we're going to manufacture PPE because there's a proven market for the next 2 years. That's great. But how many of those PPE businesses are failing now because there is no access to the market? There's no access to capital. It's the short sight, I think, was, we have a responsibility as Canadians to manufacture PPE to keep the rest of Canadians safe. And I think that that message was really driven into a lot of businesses, and those businesses that I think that went to accommodate that without knowing where they were going to take this, without having those proven sales, are now left at the end of the day wondering, okay, well, we have all of this product in the surplus. What do we do with it? So there's a lot of factors to look at, and to encourage all First Nations, I think, to become involved in the manufacturing sector. They really need to identify through their economic development strategies, is this what we want to do? And if so, what type of manufacturing do we want to get into? So I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow economies, create economic opportunity for membership, but that also works hand in hand with local municipalities, where right now, I reach out to every business in around both facilities in Sagamok and with Quemacong to let them know, we're here. What sort of products do you carry? Maybe there's something that we can do where we can work together. Always strategizing and always diversifying on what we're trying to do. That way, I think when the pandemic is over, we're well poised to benefit from the relationships that we've created and making those mutually beneficial to everybody around the table, not just here in Ontario, but right across Canada. And again, it's access to funding. It's access to the procurement opportunities with the federal government. Yes, they have the 5% target. It's also access to information. When we submitted the bid for one of the PPE submissions, again, the National Security Act was invoked on us. Okay, where does that leave us for information? Was our bid too high? Can you give us some insight as to where we need to go with this? So that we can help improve the business, so that we can help improve the supply chain. But if you don't have access to information and everything isn't fully transparent, it makes it difficult to grow that business and to grow the opportunity. I think, First Nations really should come together in a forum where, and right across Canada, where we can work together and figure out how can we do this together? How can we create jobs within the First Nations communities? How can we work with industry partners to develop these economies? I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, but we really need to focus in on what it is that we want to do.
Yeah. So there's a couple of takeaways I heard here. There's a lot to unpack, but
long-winded answer.
But I think one of the things that I think you said, Matthew, is like, for example, it's just not manufacture; it's everything else around it. It's logistics and so on and so forth. And New Zealand, the Maori had done really wonderfully because they built inland ports. Literally in terms of being able to say, okay, we want to be the logistical hub. So that's another kind of ancillary opportunity that's being created that you put out. And I think the other part that I think you said, there's more dialogue that needs to happen between the non-Indigenous community and the Indigenous community. So one of the things that I remember going back to was a lot of municipal friendship treaties that were drawn between the close communities that are around, and something that's really should be revitalized and looked at again with the municipalities. A lot of it has to do around economics and economic value. So there's another opportunity right there. But I think the biggest one I'm hearing is the information gap. I think closing the information gap, not only between government and community, but or suppliers themselves, so forth, but also between association and the Indigenous community. So I see that there's that great opportunity to be able to look to work with the Indigenous community, and it's going to be literally, a trilateral kind of effort between association, community, government, because what I mean by community is suppliers as well, at the funding agency. But I want to give Breezy, how much time do I have left? I'm really being conscientious.
No, you're still good for about another 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to give John the last word here, and I'm going to open up the floor to a lively discussion here, because I really want to hear from the participants. John, I'm going to hit you. It's a loaded question, so I'll put that caveat around there. Where's the whole of government approach can happen? Because it's not just a PSPC thing. I see an ESDC, I see an ISK, thing. I see lots of other things. So how does whole of government, and how can we support whole of government as a community?
Well, I think one of the number one things is that within, for instance, the federal structure alone, not even looking at provincials or municipalities, there's about 200 different departments and agencies under the federal umbrella. So it's kind of like walking into a shopping center as a supplier, someone like Matthew walking into a mall of stores and expecting that even though they're all buying, that they're all going to buy exactly the same. But as you go into each different storefront, you recognize there's its own culture, its own direction, and not all the stores talk to their neighbors. So one of the things within the federal government, of course, that's always kind of haunting us is coordination and collaboration. And we're all being told that this is an important thing, that we need to make reconciliation personal. We are seeing a huge movement within the government itself and individuals, like the number of individuals reaching out to someone like myself from within government saying, how do we do this? Like, I have a budget, I have things, but I need to know where the Indigenous companies are. I need to know how to reach them. I need to know how to do this. And so there's an education that happens within the business community, but also within the government. And right now, it's almost the last thing I want to hear from an economic development officer is they're burnt out because they had to hear from 60 different people from the government of Canada, all calling, saying that they were here to help, but they weren't coordinated. Because we need to correct that piece as well. We need to make sure that as we engage as government on procurement, that we're doing it, first of all, in a coordinated fashion, and we know what's happening. If Matthew's going out to participate in a procurement for one government department, and then he goes and does something for another government department, and the processes are completely different, well, that's a real strain on his company's resources, his strategy. Like, why isn't it just more of a turnkey process? And we're recognizing that is an essential part of our procurement modernization as well, is that we need to be able to do some of these things in a better way. So I think one of the things is there's a massive opportunity, but it's kind of like working in incremental government steps where, if you look back to where we were 10 years ago on procurement, and then you look at now, it looks totally different. But day to day, and especially with the energy or enthusiasm of an entrepreneur, waiting 3 months for an answer is not suitable. So waiting 3 years for an answer is definitely not suitable. And when you're trying to keep your lights on and keep people employed and solve problems, working with us can be very difficult in the short term, right? And trying to figure out that information gap. So the information gap is two ways: that it's information from government out to the business community, and how do we make sure they have the capacity to work with us, they understand our strange language and our strange processes, and that the EDO network is able to support those companies or their communities in actively engaging with us early. But at the same time, government needs to be organized. So the number one thing that I'm stressing to both the business community and to government is you have to think ahead, and you have to do early engagement. To Matthew's point on the strategies, whether you're an Indigenous community or you're a government department, both groups, both communities need to be organizing early and thinking ahead. Like, is there a 3-year cycle on this? Are we only building a bridge once every 50 years? Are we actually going to have, like, myself and David have talked about this numerous times. Government employees have not really gone back to the offices yet. So all that demand for things like the PPE or this paradigm shift, as people under the whatever the new normal is, begin to leave their home office and go back to some type of blended environment, there's going to be a very large need for things like PPE. There's going to be another major structural change that's going to occur as people try to figure out what that hybrid looks like. And we need to have conversations around that. And we need to be inviting the business community and people that will be supplying those things into that conversation to understand what's going to happen, because in the government procurement cycle, someone like Matthew may only have 40 days to respond. And to be perfectly honest, it's not enough time for a major paradigm shift or to understand what the market conditions are. And that's the type of information we need to be able to make sure is being shared both within government to people like myself, because if I don't hear about it, then I can't be working with the Indigenous business community to make sure they're prepared to respond. So the information thing is massive. And it's a huge challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity over the next couple of years. So I'll leave it there and say that the simple thing is it's a big change. It's going to happen over time. And in the short term, the biggest thing is for the EDO network, for the Indigenous businesses, is to make sure you're asking questions as early as possible. And I'm trying to push the government side continuously to have the courage to go out early enough and talk to industry on anything they're trying to do, because if they don't do it, by the time they go to market, the market may have completely shifted. Like the economic factors are moving so fast, where a supply chain opportunity that the government says, oh, well, we'll just be able to do it. To your point, it's like operating without a spare tire. Because by the time you get to the point where you're going in to make decisions that affect large populations, if you haven't really done the dialogue on an ongoing basis, the dialogue you had 6 months ago may not be relevant anymore. So I'll just put it there and say that information and conversations are essential when things are moving so fast and changing so dynamically.
Sweet. So we got about 10 minutes. So I'll open the floor for questions. You feel free to use the chat. I'm monitoring that as well. And so to kick things off, I'll ask the first question to Alan. Alan, obviously there is a more dialogue between the association and the Indigenous community is required here, especially with EDOs. How do we engage with you? And you can help us engage with government, so we can push on both ends.
Yeah, this conversation, I've actually have the same question in my head. Like, I think you're talking about information and communication. And I think, as an industry, or as representing the industry, it's something probably we should. I'm sure many of our companies are involved in this, especially in the resources industry and certain parts of the country. But I think we can do, as an organization or as an industry, do an even better job than we're doing, or improve. And I have the same question in my mind. I think we need to talk more and being more talk more, I guess. It'd be as simple as that, right? And being to think about these things, to probably not just think about it or talk about it during a panel, but actually take steps forward and take action and build a stronger and more robust domestic supply chain. And as an organization, we're absolutely like willing and able to engage in these conversations. It's something our objective is to grow the industry. So in any single way, and I think it's it's something I haven't I've been meaning to bring up too, is that there was in Canada released an Industry Strategy Council report in December with many pillars about developing this industrial strategy. And one of the key pillars was, making Canada a world leader in environmental, social, and governance principles. And being more inclusive and diverse is one of the main parts of that. So it's something the industry's looking at doing and we want to do. So we definitely need to keep working at it.
Yeah, no, you brought up a good point, and I think I'm going to go back to the Indian Act, okay? Because the Indian Act kind of, for the past 150 years, has kind of put Indigenous people on the side and then kind of create these two solitudes. I think part of economic reconciliation is basically closing the gap, and getting rid of two solitudes between the non-Indigenous community and the Indigenous community. So I think it's, incumbent of us, the associations, the Candos, the CCABs, and all the rest is to have a dialogue with the associations, because at the end of the day, it's common ground, right? We want to create jobs, we want to create these opportunities, we want to generate wealth. Whether you're non-Indigenous or Indigenous, that holds true, at the very end of the day. There's a great opportunity, I think, that where the EDOs are reaching out to the manufacturing sector, saying, listen, hey, I have an industrial park, I want to get into energy. Who can I partner with? Who can I JV with? Who can I, and joint venture with in order to create that capacity? So there's that great opportunity to sort of blur the great solitudes and, and become more diverse. Because at the end of the day, I think we all want that. And when I look at the ITBs, the Indigenous Benefits Plan, when you got a prime, he's looking for those answers, right? John, if you want to say, right, he's got to come back and say, I got to look at my supply chain, and I got to see where I can have, the Indigenous community intersect with this, and I've got to put this on my Indigenous benefits plan in order to win the bid, at the very end of the day, which creates all these great opportunities for the mad owls and myself as an Indigenous entrepreneur, but that's what I see. I see this greater energy for removing the two dialogues. Matt, what do you think I just said? I might be out to, being very utopian in a way.
Sure, absolutely. Well, for investment attraction and business retention, you're absolutely right. Dialogue has to be continuous. It has to be continuous between native and non-native entities, and it has to be open and transparent. I mean, access to markets and access to partnerships, let's face it, there's a lot of deterrence for industry to want to partner with First Nations, and there's a lot of positive things that can happen from that dialogue. I think, strategically focusing in on some of the key issues, access to provincial and federal markets, and what is it that we want to achieve at the end of the day? Economic opportunity for our membership, but we want to share the wealth as well with non-Indigenous communities as well. It's just really having a strategy that focuses on, and it's all encompassing, if we're talking about low impact land management strategies or environmentally sensitive manufacturing, what better way to do that than engage First Nations people? Because that is what First Nations culture is all about. And if we can do that, and we can do that where it's meaningful and it makes a contribution towards economic development for municipalities, and we can reduce costs, access to HR, I think that will build beneficial relationships that everybody can walk away from and be happy with. Transparency, that's all key. I mean, at the end of the day, if it's a business, it's going to operate on the return on investment. But if it's community centric, then there needs to be dialogue and focus from that community to understand what it is that they want to achieve. It's no different than tourism, bringing in clients. What's there today isn't there tomorrow. So seeing that shift in the markets with anticipating where it's going to be in the near future will help those businesses grow. But it all begins with dialogue. That's the key right there. We need to have a discussion between entrepreneurs that are actually out there doing it and the individuals that have the opportunity to change certain functions. The way we go about procuring opportunity is, somewhat convoluted by the processes themselves, and they, in turn, act as a deterrent for any business to want to become actively involved. Because how do you prepare for something with a contract that talks about millions? You have to have a surplus in your store or in your storage facility, and at the end of the day, you don't know if you're going to be awarded that contract or not. So that investment, what are you going to do with that once that's done? There's so many facets to the discussion that need to take place. It's identifying those and coming to some sort of acknowledgement as to what is the role and responsibility that the federal government is going to play with the manufacturing sector, and what sort of responsibility do Indigenous communities have to become actively involved with industry partners. So for us, it was easy because the bottom line is we had the ability to make the decisions that were based on solid business facts. And there is a market out there that required this and a call from the federal government. So all of the recipes for developing those relationships between Indigenous entity and a non-Indigenous entity were there.
Super. And that's a good segue to Alan's comment, Alan DeLorme, where he wrote in the chat, he says, friendship treaties are an interesting idea. They are there. There is a template for getting friendship treaties and for a band council to reach out to the nearest community and to the, to the manufacturing association and to create those economic reconciliation models. I think it's the most interesting time to be Indigenous in Canadian history, so especially as an entrepreneur, because of the climate. We got about 3 minutes left. I just want to give a word to each one of Alan. Alan, what's your big takeaway from today?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Well, my big takeaway is like I'm excited about the call today and the potential of developing manufacturing, greater links between manufacturing and Indigenous communities. But obviously we need to talk more. That's the other takeaway. And there's a lot of work to do. We go back to the beginning of the presentation. Of manufacturing has seen its share of activity decline over the last 15, 20 years or longer than that, and due a lot to weak investment. So again, if we want to build these connections and build manufacturing, we need to, address these other structural issues facing manufacturing today. But I think through these efforts, it can definitely help achieve that.
Yeah, John, what's your takeaway from this conversation today?
Well, I think the big thing that I'd like to say certainly to the audience is the importance of the economic development officers in the communities. And whether your title is economic development officer or you're a person within the community that is coordinating things, someone like Matthew who's not only looking out for his own business, but for his community and the opportunities to create economic wealth, is that having that strategy or that mindset is so important. So for the EDOs that are on the line today, just know how important the role is that you play. And for someone like myself in the government, having the opportunity to work with EDOs or community-focused individuals is extraordinarily important, and it will continue to open up that dialogue. So, please keep doing what you're doing.
Super. Matt, what's your takeaway for today?
Well, I think the message is starting to resonate, and that is that Indigenous people are going to become more actively involved in the manufacturing sector. And that dialogue, I think, is important. It's good in terms of the economic development that's going to occur within First Nations communities. There's a lot more dialogue that's required from the economic development offices themselves. And, if there's anything that I personally can do to help any First Nation or any municipality, First Nation or non, I'm more than happy to help with the lessons learned. And, in hindsight, I think, would I have done things differently? Probably not. I think that everything that we've done has been done in such a manner that we want to grow with the current economic situation that Canada is facing. But there is a lot of opportunity out there. And it's by having people like Alan and John at the table that are going to help us focus as Indigenous people as to where we want to go. And I think all economic development officers out there can take away something positive from that.
That's super. That's really great. I guess my big takeaway is, Alan, I'm going to be bugging you. So I want to continue on this dialogue, and I want to be able to, bridge the gap as well between the Indigenous community and manufacturing and build those. Because at the end of the day, in my true entrepreneurial spirit, I like the Indigenous community to be like the #1 exporters in Canada for manufactured goods, and we're the ones that change the curve from back into a hockey stick back up, so over the next generational shift with work fellows like Matthew and other EDOs that are looking for those opportunities. So get ready for my phone call and sharing ideas and being out there. And of course, John, I'm always going to back to you, because I'm going to go back and say we got to do this with government. Let's get on the phone with the the deputy minister or something to have this dialogue, and I'll bring Matt along with me as my bodyguard. So with that, I want to take a moment to thank Alan for joining. John, as always, you're a gentleman and a scholar, for supporting us and as OSME, and for doing things. And Matt, just keep trucking, keep doing what you do. So thank you very much, and feel free to reach out to me after the fact. You know where you can find me. All right. Thank you so much. Breezy, it's all yours.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. You did a wonderful job. Great information. I just want to let everyone know that the sessions will be recorded. They are put on to the Whova app. So make sure you take great advantage of that. Make sure you also check out everything else on the app. Go into the community. You're able to engage with some of the other participants. You can even set up meeting times with others too. So it's a very cool app. Go in there and start looking around in there. There's also a way to give some feedback for some of the sessions if you go under the surveys. So make sure you take advantage of that as well, and any slides from any of the other presentations, so you don't have to miss out on anything. All right. So we will have a bit of a break, a kind of a lunch break, whatever you're eating. Hope you enjoy. And you can actually go into the community and set up a lunch date with somebody. So that it's not speed dating. It's actually a fun networking thing to do. And then we'll be back on for our keynote speaker with Tawani Joseph at 2 o'clock. So everyone, if you can get into the main plenary room and do that. And so what you do is you just leave out of this meeting, go back into the Whova app, whether it's on your phone or on your computer. If you have it on your desktop, then you're able to go back into another session this afternoon. And thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.